Hello and welcome to today's review. Today I'm going to do something a little different. It's not what I usually do, and hopefully it doesn't bite me in the butt. Usually whenever I do a review, or virtually any video for that matter, I go in with a plan. Everything I do is scripted. That doesn't mean that my my videos are fake or anything like that. It's just, and anybody who's ever done a collab with me will understand this, I go off on a lot of tangents. If I think of something or something reminds me of something, I'm going to keep talking about it. Next thing you know, half an hour has gone by and I'm only talking about one thing. I haven't branched out into anything else. So I pre-write my reviews and then I do the video based off that. Today, I'm not going to do that because one, I'm talking about a documentary, and two, the subject matter isn't something that I can review. I can only talk about it honestly. So a few weeks ago, I was offered a screener for the 2020 documentary Knots, a Forced Marriage Story, which is directed by Kate Ryan Brewer and follows the very real look and in-depth take on the realities of child marriage, specifically in the US, and also interviews 3 women who have experienced it firsthand. And as soon as I saw this offered to me, I immediately said yes, because I could not believe the chances of this happening. A week before I was offered this, I was marathoning The Blacklist, which I've been catching up on, and now I'm up to date. But I just watched this episode about a young girl who I think was 16, 17 years old, and she was killing men. She was specifically requested, like basically hired, like a hit woman. And it came out that she was killing men who were husbands to underage wives. And it was completely legal. The FBI could not do a single thing, and these girls had basically called on this other girl to kill their husbands because it was their only way out. Their parents had given consent and permission, which meant legally everything was fine. And so they couldn't get out of their own marriages, because that also meant that they weren't legally allowed to divorce without their parents' consent. The parents wanted this, and they couldn't say no because that's part of, for them, it's their culture or tradition, or it's just what the parents thought was best. And then it turned out the young girl who was killing all these people, the same thing had happened to her. Only it wasn't a race or a cultural thing. She was raped when she was a child, and her parents, feeling ashamed of their child, married her off to her rapist, where he took her back to the US and he continued to brutalize her until one day she had enough and she killed him. That all sounds like, you know, a fascinating plot for a TV series, except it was hard not to get emotional watching it because I knew that that was a reality. And so as soon as I was offered this, I was like, what are the chances? I've just watched this subject on The Blacklist, and now there's a documentary on it. And I'm like, I would be hard-pressed to say no. That would be stupid of me to say no on something that I think a lot of people should be educated on. So I immediately said yes, and I started watching it. And I got about 28 minutes into it when I had to stop watching because I couldn't stop crying. And I could start crying right now thinking about it. Listening to these women talk about their stories, whether it be about the religions that they were a part of. One of them was definitely not a real religion. One woman was Jewish, another woman was Christian, but it was a very interesting Christian sect that didn't feel like proper Christianity. It felt like a cult claiming to be Christian. And the other one was a daughter of a man who had found a hippie type religion, which, as far as I'm concerned, it sounded like a cult. The fact that they made her like call her mother and lie about her circumstances and where she was and all this stuff, it didn't sound, it sounded very sketchy. But in each circumstance, these women were forced into marriage, which led to all of them being legally raped, forced to have children, and stuck in these situations, denied education, denied financial stability, independence, denied the ability to really socialize properly, have friends, have jobs, anything like that. It's legal sex slaves. And listening to them and their stories and their honesty, while they weren't crying, they made me cry, because the pain and trauma was still written on their face, it was in their eyes, and it was in their voice. And while they could speak without crying, that pain was very clearly there. Now, this documentary focused only on the US, but child marriage happens worldwide, and so many of us seem to think that it only happens in third world countries, or stupidly that people think that it's a Middle Eastern thing, or all that. It's everywhere. Everywhere. And people can use whatever they want to excuse it. Religion is a common one, but a lot of people use religion as an excuse for the act of child marriage, but in no legit religious text is child marriage a requirement of any religion. There's no such thing. And it is often the men who declare this. This is never young boys being married off to older women. This is young, sometimes prepubescent girls being married off to men, if they're lucky, in their 20s. But it's usually men over the age of 40. Marrying children because God says so. No, that is people who are brainwashing people into believing that God and religion makes child and sexual abuse and basically pedophilia okay, and it's not. The scary thing about this is that it's all legal, and there's nothing that these young women can do to stop it. And the organizations that exist to help them, most of the time legally, are not allowed to do so. In the US, 46 states still allow some form of child marriage. It is legal. And 10 states in the US have no minimum age for marriage. Meaning, as long as parents consent, a child can be married off to an adult, and it is completely legal. And it doesn't, in those 10 states, it does not matter how young that child is. In one story in this documentary, they talk about a young woman who was raped when she was, I think it might have been 15. She was young, she was raped, and she got pregnant. The father was not scared for her, was not upset for her. He was ashamed that she got pregnant. He was ashamed that she was raped. He was ashamed of her and refused to have a daughter who was pregnant outside of marriage. That was nothing to do with his religion. That was just his personal beliefs. His state allowed him to marry her off to her rapist, as long as he gave consent. But he took it a step further so that nobody would ask questions. He drove her to a different state where you don't even have to go before a judge to get married. It just takes signing a piece of paper in front of a county clerk and you're done. That's what he did, and he married his child off to her rapist so that she could continue being abused and be alone as she gives birth as a child in the care of her abuser. Because her father was ashamed of her. And yeah, that was like the Blacklist story, except that's not a story. It's not a story that was written for a script. It's a reality. This isn't a small statistic either. This is millions upon millions upon millions of women each year who, I shouldn't even say women, girls, young girls who are forced into child marriage. And you think that it only happens in underprivileged countries. It happens everywhere. It does not matter religion, race, country. It happens everywhere. And it is often decided by men, older men, and it is, like I said, young girls being married off to older men. And it's legal. It's fucking legal. Like I said, I had to stop after 28 minutes because I couldn't stop crying, and it took me maybe 1 or 2 weeks to come back and finish watching it because I kind of had to mentally prepare myself to go back in because it's such an emotional subject. And there was not a single part of it that did not upset me. There was footage of a debate in Virginia among politicians about making it so they were trying to find a loophole to give these young girls some legal way of protecting themselves because one did not exist and still does not exist in majority states. It would be that, yes, your parents could legally consent and you would be married off to an adult, but you are not an adult. So without your parents' consent, you cannot get divorced. You cannot call child protective services because child protective services deal with parent-child issues, not husband-wife issues. That's not their jurisdiction. That's not something that they can help with. The wife cannot go to a women's shelter or a shelter of any kind because they are underage, so they will be turned away, or they will call the police and send them back home, literally sending them back to their abuser. You can go to the police and say this person is abusing me, but you can't just say this other person, it's your husband. And there are laws that protect the sanctity of marriage. So these young girls are literally trapped, forced to have sex, and because they're underage, they're under the legal age of consent, so this is rape. They don't want this. If it's religion or just indoctrination, they're brainwashed to believe that this is what is expected of them and they don't have a choice, and then others are just forced into it. So either way, it is rape. It is a form of slavery. It is mental, physical, emotional abuse on every level. And so some states were trying to pass a law that said, okay, if you become, through legal means, married under the age of 18, that the law immediately declares you an adult. You will become emancipated. If your parents sign you off and agree to marry you and give you over to someone else, the law has to see you as an adult. Therefore, if you want out, you have the power to do so because you are no longer controlled by either party. And Virginia, I do think, was the first state that managed to pass this, where any child who was legally married became emancipated. They did, I believe, they did the same thing in New Jersey until Governor Chris Christie repealed it, saying that to make this a law, impedes people of their religious rights. That preventing these young girls from being declared adults, or from even just them trying to raise the age of marriage legally, because I think New Jersey was a state that didn't have a minimum age requirement for marriage, and they were trying to create one. And so he was just saying, yeah, that if we create this law, which I think existed and then he repealed it, it's like, well, yeah, if we have this law, it's shitting on people's religious rights. And as I said, there is no such religion where child marriage is a fucking requirement. And if there is, your religion is fucking disgusting. This is why I couldn't write a review, and I could only feel like just talking about how I feel and how it made me feel. It broke my heart, it angered me, it disgusted me to know that how prevalent this is, and I know that it happens in my country too. And it's legal. That's the part that just angers me. It's terrible when I think of people who are victims of abuse and sexual assault and all of that. That already hurts me. But to think that there is a system in all these countries that allows this to happen legally, that there are parents out there who think that this is okay, that you can just sign away your child like they don't matter, like they're property, and sign them off to some stranger to be abused. It shakes me to my core, and I don't understand why there are so many countries or states within those countries that are still not willing to recognize this and do something about it. And I knew this because as soon as I saw that Blacklist episode and I looked up the statistics, and I was absolutely horrified by how many women this affects every year. How many young girls this affects every year. How many countries. I have no words beyond that. So I am very grateful that this documentary exists, because even though it doesn't focus globally and is only centered on the United States of America, it opens the door of conversation to this topic, a topic that 100% needs to be discussed and addressed. Something needs to be done. Laws have to change in all these countries to protect these girls, to stop this from happening. We as a society need to get together and make this stop. So I'm so very grateful that this documentary exists. I appreciate the facts that it presents. I appreciate that it doesn't sugarcoat anything. I appreciate and respect the women who spoke out in that documentary about their personal experiences so candidly and without fear, because each of them now works in an area where they help people who are just like them. And yet there is a system in place that is trying to prevent them from doing so, and it's not okay. Like when I was watching that debate when they're trying to pass that law in Virginia, and there was this male politician who was standing up, who was saying that to declare these children as adults once they are married takes away the rights of the parents. If you're signing your children away like fucking property, you don't deserve rights to your child. Fuck the parent, okay? We're talking about preserving the life of the person who lives and exists and is going to be abused. I don't give a shit about their parents' beliefs or views or religion or whatever. I care about that person's physical and mental well-being. And if your parents are going to put you through that, fuck your parents, seriously. And listening to him speak like that and so confident in his words, I wanted to reach through my television and punch him in the fucking face. Because people like that do exist. And when these women were talking about when they were trying to help protest and get these bills passed in these states, and that they were being contacted mostly by men who were angry about them trying to pass these laws, saying that I refuse to let my daughter be married, I refuse to let my daughter be pregnant unwed. And of course, one woman pointed out, if your child is underage and pregnant, a crime has been committed, and yet that's not your concern. It's just about you keeping face. And it was so many. And it was mostly fathers or men who clearly have proclivities towards children. They were the ones who mostly had an issue with it. That speaks fucking volumes. I've cussed a lot in this, and if that offends you, I am sorry. But the realities behind the stories that were told, that offends me. So, if you have not seen this documentary, which again is called Not a Forced Marriage Story, if you can stomach the subject matter, please watch it. And if need be, please watch it, and if you are so inclined, please do. You can reach out to politicians, you can look up what the laws are in your country and your state, reach out and sign petitions, protest, do whatever, just start a conversation, do the research. And if you, I hope not, but if you are someone who is watching this who has gone through this, I am so sorry that society and your family failed you. I hope that you're out of that situation. If you are not out of that situation, know that there are places you can contact. There are people that you can speak to who will do their very best to help you. And I hope that we get to a point where child marriage will no longer be a thing. But this was, without a doubt, one of the most hard-hitting documentaries I've seen. I do tend to cry at documentaries, but I haven't been so heartbroken as I was watching this. So I highly recommend, if you have the stomach for it, please watch this. There's nothing inappropriate about it. It's just a very emotional subject, and if you can handle that, please watch this, because this is definitely one of the best things that I've seen this year. I'm not going to keep talking because I think I've repeated myself and I've said more than I intended to. This was actually meant to be a short video. That obviously didn't work out because I got a little carried away because I got very emotional, and this is why everything I do is scripted, because I go off and I don't stop. So, that is it. If you have seen this documentary, please comment down below. If you would just like to comment and talk about the topic of this documentary, please, I encourage you to do so. By all means, I'm happy to talk. But I'm probably going to go and sit and cry and think more about this documentary, even though I really don't want to. So that is it. I hope everybody is well. Thank you, as always, to my amazing patrons. Wherever you are, whatever you are doing, please stay safe, stay healthy, watch movies, and I hope to see you in my next video. So until then, bye.